8 months earlier, Sarah and I stood on the freshly paved driveway of our new home, her hand resting protectively on her barely visible baby bump. The neighborhood appeared pristine from every angle. Maple trees lined both sides of the street in perfect symmetry. Each lawn displayed the exact same shade of green, cut to precisely the same height. Flower beds burst with coordinated colors that seemed to complement each neighboring house. This was exactly what we had dreamed of when we decided to start our family. A safe, beautiful community where our child could grow up surrounded by nature and friendly neighbors. "Can you believe this is actually ours?" Sarah whispered, squeezing my hand as we took in the two-story colonial with its fresh white paint and navy blue shutters. I pulled her close, feeling the slight roundness of her stomach press against me. "The perfect place for the three of us," I replied, unable to contain my smile. The moving truck rumbled down the street behind us, signaling the official start of our new life in Oak Ridge Estates. The first few weeks passed in a blur of unpacking boxes and assembling nursery furniture. We met a few neighbors who brought welcome baskets and shared stories about community events. Mrs. Jenkins from across the street mentioned something about strict HOA rules but assured us they mostly ensured property values remained high. "Just keep your lawn tidy and your trash cans out of sight, and you will have no problems," she advised with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. I found the first notice on a Tuesday morning. A white paper sealed in plastic and taped to our front door with the bold header, "Violation Notice," across the top. According to the document, our mailbox was approximately 1.75 inches taller than regulation height and needed immediate adjustment. The bottom displayed an official-looking stamp but no signature. I found it odd, but assumed it was standard procedure in such a well-maintained community. 3 days later, another notice appeared, this time about unauthorized vegetation in our garden beds. Sarah had planted a few marigolds around our porch, apparently violating some obscure bylaw about approved flora. "This is getting ridiculous," Sarah complained as she wadded up the paper. "Those flowers are perfectly fine, and the neighbors have the same variety." I promised to look into it, not wanting her to stress during pregnancy. That weekend marked our first encounter with Gerald Simmons. I was adjusting the mailbox height when a shadow fell across the lawn. A man in his mid-50s stood watching me, wearing khaki pants, a polo shirt, and a navy blue windbreaker with HOA security embroidered on the breast pocket. His gray hair was cut military short, and he clutched a clipboard to his chest like a shield. "New adjustments must be submitted for approval before implementation," he stated without introducing himself. His voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I stepped down from my ladder and extended my hand. "Hi there, I am Mark Thompson. We just moved in a few weeks ago." Gerald ignored my outstretched hand, instead making a note on his clipboard. The violation notice clearly stated that alterations require Form 37 be submitted with proper measurements. This appears to be an unauthorized correction attempt. His eyes never left his clipboard as he spoke. I felt my smile falter but maintained my composure. "Sorry about that. I was just trying to fix the height issue from the previous notice. Where can I get this form?" I asked, trying to sound cooperative despite the growing discomfort in my stomach. Finally, he looked up, his eyes cold as they assessed me. "All forms are available at monthly meetings. The next one is in 3 weeks. Until then, cease all exterior modifications." Without waiting for my response, he turned and walked away, stopping briefly to photograph our front garden where Sarah had planted the allegedly unauthorized marigolds. That evening, as Sarah and I sat on our porch swing, we noticed how neighbors quickly diverted their eyes whenever Gerald appeared on his patrol. What we had initially mistaken for perfect order now revealed itself as something darker, a neighborhood living under constant surveillance, where small freedoms were sacrificed in the name of uniformity. "Maybe we made a mistake," Sarah whispered, her hand protectively covering her growing belly. I squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, but inside, a seed of doubt had taken root. The perfect facade of Oak Ridge Estates had begun to crack. As winter gradually surrendered to spring, the harassment from Gerald intensified with alarming regularity. Sarah was now 6 months pregnant, her belly prominently displayed beneath her sweaters. The nursery was painted a soft yellow, and tiny clothes waited in drawers for their future occupant. What should have been a peaceful time of preparation instead became a period of growing anxiety, as Gerald seemed to focus his attention specifically on our home. The notices appeared with increasing frequency. One cited excessive holiday decorations for the single wreath on our door during December. Another claimed our trash bins remained visible for 17 minutes after collection, exceeding the 15-minute allowance. The most absurd arrived after a light snow, declaring our sidewalk insufficiently cleared despite my having shoveled twice that morning. I decided to research the actual HOA bylaws and requested a copy from the management office. The clerk seemed nervous when I asked for enforcement protocols. "You should really speak with the board directly," she suggested in a lowered voice. "The monthly meeting is next week." She glanced around as if worried about being overheard before sliding the document folder across the counter. That evening I pored over the bylaws while Sarah rested on the couch, her feet elevated to reduce the swelling that had begun to concern her obstetrician. "Listen to this," I said, tapping the page. "The HOA has only 5 official positions: president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and maintenance coordinator. There is no security position listed anywhere." Sarah shifted uncomfortably, wincing as she adjusted her position. "So what exactly is Gerald doing with all those violation notices?" I approached our next-door neighbor, Tom Baker, the following day as he retrieved his mail. "Can I ask you something about the HOA security officer?" I inquired casually. Tom immediately stiffened, glancing nervously toward Gerald's house 3 doors down. "Look, man," he whispered, "Gerald is not officially anything. He started doing this about 3 years ago after retiring from whatever government job he had. Nobody stops him because, frankly, it is easier to comply than fight." He shook his head. "My advice, just follow his rules until he finds someone else to bother." At her 7-month checkup, Sarah's blood pressure readings concerned Dr. Mitchell enough that she recommended stress reduction and more rest. "Your numbers are higher than I would like to see at this stage," the doctor explained while reviewing the chart. "Is anything causing you unusual stress at home?" Sarah's eyes met mine briefly before she detailed the constant anxiety of living under Gerald's watchful eye. Dr. Mitchell frowned deeply. "Stress can trigger premature labor and other complications. You need to prioritize a calm environment for these final weeks." Her words echoed in my mind during the silent drive home, Sarah staring absently out the passenger window, one hand resting on her rounded belly. 3 days later, a confrontation erupted in our driveway as we returned from a follow-up appointment. Gerald stood beside his measuring tape stretched across our lawn, methodically documenting something in his ever-present clipboard. When he spotted us, he marched purposefully toward our car. "Your grass exceeds the maximum height by 0.25 inches, he announced as Sarah struggled to exit the passenger seat. "This is your 3rd related violation this month. The HOA board will be discussing punitive measures at the next meeting." I stepped between him and Sarah, keeping my voice level despite my rising anger. "Gerald, we have received your notices. My wife is having a difficult pregnancy, and her doctor has specifically advised against stress. Please give us some reasonable accommodation until after the baby arrives." Gerald pressed his clipboard against his chest like armor. His eyes narrowed as he looked past me to Sarah. "Rules exist regardless of personal circumstances. Examples must be made of consistent rule breakers to maintain community standards." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Properties with multiple violations can face significant fines or even forced compliance measures." "Are you threatening us?" I asked incredulously, feeling Sarah's hand grip my arm tightly. "I am informing you of established consequences," he replied coldly before turning to leave. "I suggest immediate correction of all documented violations." That night I began photographing each notice and creating a documentation file. Sarah watched anxiously from the doorway of our home office. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight with worry. "Building a case," I replied, organizing the papers chronologically. I emailed the actual HOA board members requesting a meeting. "This has gone far beyond reasonable enforcement. Gerald has no official authority, and we need to establish boundaries." As March gave way to April, Sarah entered her final month of pregnancy. The doctor had begun monitoring her weekly, concerned about her elevated blood pressure and signs of early dilation. Meanwhile, our attempts to meet with the HOA board were consistently postponed or rescheduled. Other neighbors had begun warning us in hushed tones about Gerald's pattern of escalation with problem residents. One elderly woman confided that the previous owners of our home had moved specifically because of his harassment. The calendar pages turned toward Sarah's due date as a sense of impending crisis loomed over our once-dream home. Each morning, I checked the front door with dread, expecting another notice, another confrontation. Each night, Sarah tossed restlessly beside me, her body preparing for birth while her mind remained trapped in stress. Something would have to give soon. The day that changed everything began unremarkably. Sarah had reached 38 weeks, her due date just 14 days away. The spring evening felt perfect, mild temperature, gentle breeze, the neighborhood gardens erupting with fresh blooms. After dinner, Sarah suggested we take a short walk to ease the persistent ache in her lower back. The doctor said walking might help position the baby better, she explained, slipping on comfortable shoes with difficulty over her swollen feet. I supported her elbow as we made our way slowly down our front steps and onto the community walking path that wound through the shared green space. The sinking sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns as we moved at a careful pace. Sarah paused occasionally to rest, one hand pressed against the small of her back while the other cradled her protruding belly. Her face looked serene for the first time in weeks as she breathed the fresh air. "This was a good idea," I said, watching color return to her cheeks. "You seem more relaxed than you have been in ages." We had walked perhaps a quarter mile when Sarah suddenly stopped, a strange expression crossing her face. "Something feels different," she murmured, both hands now pressing against her stomach. I noticed a slight dampness on her light cotton pants. "I think we should head back," she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. We had just turned toward home when Sarah gasped sharply, bending forward slightly. "That was definitely a contraction," she whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and fear. "But it is too early, too sudden." Another followed quickly, causing her to grip my arm with surprising strength. "Mark, I think this is happening now. We need to get to the hospital." Our pace quickened as much as her condition allowed, Sarah pausing every few minutes as contractions rippled through her body. We had almost reached the section of path that would lead us back to our street when a familiar figure stepped out from between two hedgerows, blocking our way. Gerald stood firmly in the center of the path, clipboard in hand, wearing his self-appointed uniform complete with the HOA security jacket. His face registered no concern despite Sarah's obvious distress. "This section of the community path closes to resident use at 6 p.m., he announced, consulting his wristwatch. "It is now 6:22. You are in violation of recreation area usage regulations." I stepped forward, supporting Sarah, who was breathing heavily through another contraction. "Gerald, my wife is in labor. We need to get to our car and to the hospital immediately. Please move aside." His expression remained impassive as he made a notation on his clipboard. "Medical emergencies do not constitute exemptions to established regulations. You should have considered timing restrictions before planning your walk." Sarah moaned softly, doubling over as another contraction hit. "Please," she gasped, "the contractions are coming very fast." I attempted to guide Sarah around Gerald, but he sidestepped, continuing to block our path. "Attempting to circumvent security enforcement is a separate violation," he stated, gesturing emphatically with his right arm. "All residents must." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Gerald swung his arm wide to emphasize his point, his hand struck Sarah's extended belly with unexpected force. Her eyes widened in shock and pain. For a moment, everyone froze in disbelief. Then Sarah screamed, a primal, terrified sound that shattered the evening quiet. She clutched her stomach and collapsed onto the concrete path. A rush of clear fluid spread beneath her as she cried out again. "The baby, Mark, the baby is coming right now." I dropped to my knees beside her, phone already in hand, dialing emergency services. "My wife is in labor on the street," I shouted when the operator answered. "We need an ambulance immediately." I rattled off our location while trying to comfort Sarah, who was now clearly in the final stages of labor, her body instinctively pushing despite her terror. Gerald remained standing above us, seemingly unable to process what was happening. "This is an unauthorized medical event in a common area," he muttered, still clutching his clipboard. "There are procedures for—" "Shut up," I roared, my fear transforming instantly to rage. "Get help or get away from us." Lights began turning on in surrounding homes as Sarah's cries drew attention. Aces appeared in windows, and several neighbors emerged onto their porches, witnessing the scene unfolding on their community path. Mrs. Jenkins was the first to rush over, carrying towels and a blanket from her home. "I was a nurse before retiring," she explained, kneeling beside Sarah and arranging the blanket for privacy. "The ambulance might not arrive in time. This baby is coming now." Sarah gripped my hand with bone-crushing force as another contraction overwhelmed her. Mrs. Jenkins positioned herself calmly, offering gentle instructions. "When the next contraction comes, you need to push, dear. Your body knows what to do." Time seemed to both stop and accelerate simultaneously. Neighbors formed a protective semicircle around us, some holding up additional blankets for privacy, others turning on phone flashlights as darkness fell. Gerald stood frozen at the periphery, his clipboard hanging limply at his side, his authority evaporated in the face of real crisis. 3 powerful contractions later, the night air filled with the miraculous sound of our child's first cry. "It is a girl," Mrs. Jenkins announced, her experienced hands wrapping our daughter in a clean towel before placing her on Sarah's chest. "A beautiful, perfect little girl." Tears streamed down Sarah's exhausted face as she cradled our newborn. Despite the trauma of the birth, despite the concrete beneath us and the circle of neighbors bearing witness, a moment of pure wonder enveloped us. Our daughter had arrived, not in the sterile safety of a hospital room, but under an open sky with an entire community as unexpected doulas. The wail of approaching sirens finally broke through the strange bubble of time that had formed around us. Emergency lights reflected off windows and faces as paramedics rushed down the path with equipment and a gurney. As they knelt to assess Sarah and our newborn, I became aware of murmuring voices around us. Neighbors were pointing toward Gerald, their faces transformed from habitual fear to outraged disbelief. "I saw him hit her stomach," one voice stated clearly. "He blocked them from getting help," added another. "He caused this," a third voice confirmed. As the paramedics prepared to transport Sarah and our daughter to the hospital, I stood on shaking legs. Through the blur of tears and adrenaline, I locked eyes with Gerald, who had backed away from the accusatory stares of the neighbors. For the first time since we had met, his composure had crumbled completely. In that moment, as strangers cared for my family after his actions had endangered them, I made a silent vow. This was not over, not by a long shot. The hospital corridor felt unnaturally bright after the chaos of the street birth. Doctors and nurses moved efficiently around Sarah and our newborn daughter, their faces professionally concerned as they conducted examinations and connected monitoring equipment. Words like trauma, stress-induced labor, and potential complications floated through the air as I stood numbly beside the treatment bed, still wearing clothes stained with the evidence of my daughter's birth. A gentle-faced doctor finally approached me, clipboard in hand, a sight that momentarily triggered a surge of irrational anger until I registered her compassionate expression. "Your wife is stable, but her blood pressure remains concerning," she explained. "The placental delivery was incomplete, which can lead to hemorrhaging. We will need to monitor her closely overnight." I nodded mechanically, struggling to process information through my exhaustion. "And our baby?" I managed to ask, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. "Your daughter is showing some signs of respiratory distress common in precipitous births," she replied. "Nothing severe, but we have admitted her to the NICU for observation. The street delivery exposed her to potential infection risks we want to monitor." The reality of what had happened began to solidify in my mind. My child's first moments had occurred not in the safety we had planned and prepared for, but on cold concrete, because a man with a clipboard and a fake title had physically prevented us from reaching help. The initial shock gave way to a cold, clarifying anger. Hours later, I stood before the glass wall of the NICU, watching my tiny daughter's chest rise and fall beneath monitoring wires. She was impossibly small, her skin still bearing the redness of her dramatic entrance into the world. A nurse had helped me wash up and provided scrubs to replace my soiled clothes. Down the hall, Sarah slept fitfully, her body beginning the hard work of recovery from both birth and trauma. The sound of approaching footsteps drew my attention. Tom Baker, our neighbor, stood awkwardly in the corridor, holding a stuffed bear. "The whole neighborhood knows," he said without preamble. "Everyone is talking about what Gerald did. Some people are finally speaking up about their own experiences with him." "Live?" Septed the bear wordlessly as Tom continued, his voice lowered. "Gerald is already trying to control the narrative. He sent an email to all residents claiming your wife violated community path regulations and experienced an unfortunate medical incident that he attempted to manage appropriately. He is suggesting you were combative and refused his assistance." Rage surged through me so powerfully that my vision briefly blurred. "He struck my pregnant wife and blocked us from getting medical help," I stated, my voice dangerously quiet. "My daughter was born on pavement because of him." Tom shifted uncomfortably. "I know, I was there, so were at least a dozen others. People are shocked, but—" he hesitated. "Some are still afraid to speak against him openly. He has controlled this neighborhood for years through intimidation." I turned back to the NICU window, watching the steady rhythm of monitors tracking my daughter's vital signs. What exactly is his position? Does he actually represent the HOA in any official capacity? Tom shook his head emphatically. "No, he attended a few meetings years ago, volunteered for a neighborhood watch program that never officially formed, then just started acting like he had authority. The actual board members are mostly absentee property investors who live elsewhere. They let him handle the day-to-day because it was convenient. Nobody challenged him because it was easier to comply." Throughout that long night, more neighbors appeared, bringing cards, flowers, and hesitant confessions of their own experiences with Gerald. Mrs. Jenkins arrived with home-cooked meals and stayed to sit with Sarah while I consulted with hospital staff. An elderly man from 3 streets over revealed that Gerald had once threatened to have his emotional support dog removed for unauthorized animal presence, despite proper documentation. By morning, as sunlight streamed through hospital windows, I watched Sarah holding our daughter for a supervised feeding session, the NICU nurse hovering nearby. Despite the trauma of her birth, our child seemed stronger today, her color improved, her tiny fingers gripping Sarah's offered finger with surprising strength. My wife looked up at me, exhaustion evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "I never want another family to experience what we did," she said softly, stroking our daughter's delicate cheek. "No one should have the power he wields without accountability." In that moment, watching my family recovering from a preventable trauma, something crystallized within me. This was not merely about violation notices or petty rules. This was about one man's unchecked control over an entire community, his imagined authority now proven dangerous enough to threaten lives. The path forward became suddenly, blindingly clear. "I promise you," I replied, pressing a gentle kiss to our daughter's forehead, "Gerald Simmons will never again put anyone at risk the way he did us." As Sarah adjusted our newborn against her chest, I made a silent vow that our daughter's dramatic arrival would become the catalyst for change throughout Oak Ridge Estates. This false authority had maintained its power through collective fear and silence. Both were about to end. Our daughter Emma came home from the hospital after 5 days in the NICU. Sarah followed 2 days later, still recovering from complications related to the traumatic birth. Our house transformed into a strange combination of newborn nursery and investigative headquarters as I balanced caring for my family with building a case against Gerald. The home office became command central. A large corkboard dominated one wall, gradually filling with photographs of violation notices, printed emails, and a carefully constructed timeline of Gerald's escalating harassment. Red string connected related incidents, creating a visual map of his systematic intimidation campaign against not just us but the entire neighborhood. While Emma slept in her bassinet beside my desk and Sarah rested in the adjacent bedroom, I meticulously researched HOA law, property rights, and the specific bylaws governing Oak Ridge Estates. The community covenants clearly stated that enforcement actions could only be authorized by elected board members, not self-appointed individuals. Gerald had no legal standing whatsoever. Word spread quickly throughout the neighborhood that someone was finally challenging the status quo. Initially, neighbors approached cautiously, afraid of retaliation. Mrs. Jenkins became my unofficial assistant, arranging discreet meetings with residents willing to share their experiences. She would sit with Sarah and Emma, giving me time to record testimonials in the relative privacy of our backyard patio. He threatened to report my holiday lights to the city as a fire hazard, one neighbor confided, voice barely above a whisper despite being inside our home. When I pointed out they were standard commercial lights, he suggested my homeowner's insurance might be invalidated for willful code violations, and left a printout about house fires caused by electrical issues. Another couple described finding their garden destroyed after challenging Gerald about entering their backyard without permission. We could never prove it was him, but the timing was too coincidental. After that, we just did whatever his notices demanded. The most valuable information came from Eliza Gardner, an 80-year-old resident who had lived in the neighborhood since before the HOA was established. She arrived one afternoon carrying a weathered accordion folder. "I keep everything," she explained, setting it on my desk. "My late husband was a journalist. He taught me that documentation matters." Inside the folder, I found newspaper clippings from 15 years earlier showing a younger Gerald Simmons being forced to resign from a security company after complaints about excessive force. More recent clippings documented community disputes in another suburb where he had previously lived. "They practically ran him out of Meadow Creek Estates," Eliza explained. "Then he moved here and started all over again." While gathering resident testimonials, I also obtained official HOA documentation revealing that Gerald had never been elected or appointed to any position. Board meeting minutes showed he occasionally attended as a regular homeowner but had no official role in governance or enforcement. His entire authority was fabricated, sustained solely through intimidation and the community's collective failure to challenge him. 3 weeks after Emma's birth, I consulted with Patricia Winters, an attorney specializing in HOA disputes. Her office walls displayed diplomas and certifications that immediately inspired confidence. She reviewed my evidence methodically, occasionally nodding or making notes. "What you have described constitutes several actionable offenses," she explained, tapping her pen against the stack of documentation. "Harassment, impersonation of authority, assault of a pregnant woman, and potentially criminal negligence related to blocking emergency medical access. Additionally, the HOA board itself may be liable for failing to prevent his actions after being made aware of complaints." I leaned forward, adjusting my daughter in my arms as she slept peacefully against my chest. "What do you recommend as next steps?" Patricia outlined a multi-pronged approach: formal complaints with the actual HOA board, potential civil litigation against both Gerald and the HOA, and criminal charges related to the assault that triggered Sarah's labor. "Documentation will be crucial," she emphasized. "Witness statements, medical records establishing causation between the assault and premature labor, and evidence of his pattern of harassment and false authority." While building our case, Gerald continued his campaign of intimidation, now with an emphasis on damage control. An email circulated to residents characterizing my family as problem homeowners exploiting an unfortunate medical incident for personal gain. He left voicemails threatening legal action for defamation and conspiracy to undermine community standards. Each message, each threat, each attempt at intimidation was documented and added to our growing file. One evening, as I added the latest evidence to our corkboard, Sarah entered the office carrying Emma, freshly fed and drowsy. She studied the wall of documentation, her face solemn. "I never wanted this fight," she said softly. "All we wanted was a peaceful home for our family." I gently took Emma from her arms, marveling at how something so small could inspire such fierce protectiveness. "This stopped being just about us the moment he put you and Emma in danger," I replied. "This is about an entire community held hostage by someone with no actual authority." Sarah nodded, touching a photograph of Emma in the NICU, wires monitoring her tiny body. "Then we need to make sure this never happens to anyone else." By the 1-month anniversary of Emma's dramatic birth, our documentation was comprehensive and damning. With Patricia's guidance, we prepared a formal presentation for the HOA board and local authorities. The evidence was organized chronologically, establishing a clear pattern of escalation culminating in the incident that endangered my wife and child. Witness statements were collected from 12 different households, many overcoming years of intimidation to finally speak out. The stage was set for a confrontation that would forever change Oak Ridge Estates. Gerald Simmons had ruled through fear and false authority for years. That reign was about to end, not with a clipboard and fabricated rules, but with the legal system he had pretended to represent. The Oak Ridge Estates Community Center hummed with nervous energy as residents filed in for the emergency HOA meeting. Many arrived early, selecting seats with careful delibera. Tian, close enough to witness everything, but positioned to avoid direct confrontation. I stood near the front, reviewing my presentation notes while Patricia arranged documents on the table beside the projector. Sarah sat in the front row, Emma sleeping against her chest in a baby carrier. Dark circles under her eyes testified to sleepless nights caring for our newborn while recovering from birth complications. Yet her presence made a powerful statement. This was not an abstract dispute over rules, but a matter affecting real families, real lives. Board members entered through a side door, looking uncomfortable as they noted the unprecedented attendance. HOA meetings typically drew 5 or 6 residents. Tonight, nearly 80 filled the room. The board president, a real estate investor who rarely visited the properties he owned, cleared his throat nervously as he called the meeting to order. "We have a special agenda item tonight," he began, shuffling papers. "A resident complaint requiring board attention." The side door opened again, and Gerald entered, wearing his familiar HOA security jacket and carrying his ever-present clipboard. He appeared momentarily startled by the crowd before his face settled into practiced authority. He moved to stand beside the board members as if he belonged there. "Mr. Simmons," the board president said awkwardly, "this portion of the meeting concerns allegations against you specifically. You should be seated in the audience section." Gerald's expression flickered with surprise before he recovered. "As head of neighborhood security, I should be positioned to maintain order during potentially contentious discussions," he replied smoothly. The board president glanced at his colleagues before responding. "The board has no record of appointing you to any security position, Mr. Simmons. Please take a seat." A murmur spread through the audience as Gerald reluctantly moved to a chair in the front row, directly across from Sarah and Emma. His eyes briefly met mine, registering the first hint of genuine concern I had ever seen in them. I was introduced and moved to the presentation area. The projector illuminated with the first slide, a simple title page reading "Unauthorized Enforcement Activities in Oak Ridge Estates, a Pattern of Harassment and Endangerment." "For the past 3 years," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart, "residents of this community have been subjected to a campaign of intimidation and false authority by an individual with no official standing." I clicked to the next slide showing Gerald's self-created HOA security badge alongside the official HOA documentation listing all authorized positions. For the next 30 minutes, I methodically presented our evidence. Photographs of violation notices compared with actual HOA bylaws demonstrating discrepancies. Recordings of residents describing intimidation tactics. Medical records establishing the connection between Gerald's assault and Sarah's premature labor. Security camera footage from a neighbor's home showing the actual incident on the community path, including Gerald striking Sarah's pregnant belly and blocking our path as she collapsed. The room remained eerily silent throughout the presentation, broken only by occasional gasps when particularly egregious examples appeared on screen. Gerald shifted increasingly in his seat, his clipboard now lying forgotten beside him. "The most serious incident occurred on April 15th, I continued, my voice tightening as I reached this part of the timeline. "My wife, then 38 weeks pregnant, was struck in her abdomen by Mr. Simmons during a confrontation on the community path. He then blocked our access to emergency medical care, resulting in our daughter being born on the concrete sidewalk. The final slide showed Emma in the NICU, tiny and vulnerable beneath monitoring equipment. Our daughter spent 5 days in intensive care due to complications from her traumatic birth. My wife continues to recover from physical injuries sustained during this incident. I concluded by addressing the board directly. We are formally requesting immediate action. First, official board acknowledgement that Gerald Simmons holds no authorized position within this HOA. Second, a cease and desist order preventing him from issuing notices or representing himself as HOA security. And third, board cooperation with legal authorities regarding potential criminal charges. Patricia stepped forward, distributing copies of our formal complaint to board members. Additionally, she stated, we have filed police reports regarding the assault and obstruction of emergency medical care. Officers are present tonight to serve Mr. Simmons with documentation regarding those charges. 2 uniformed police officers who had been standing quietly at the rear of the room now moved forward. Gerald stood abruptly, his face flushing. This is absurd. I have protected this community and maintained standards that preserve property values. These people, he gestured wildly toward us, have repeatedly violated clearly established regulations. The board president leaned into his microphone. Mr. Simmons, please be seated. The board needs to address the evidence presented. Evidence? Gerald scoffed. Fabricated complaints from residents who refuse to maintain community standards. I have documented every violation meticulously. He brandished his clipboard like a weapon. An elderly man rose from his seat near the back. I served on this board when we first formed the HOA 15 years ago, he stated, his voice quavering slightly with age but firm with conviction. We never created a security position. We never authorized anyone to issue violation notices without board approval. Mr. Simmons has been operating entirely outside our governance structure. Other residents began standing, one after another, adding their testimonies. The dam of silence had finally broken. Gerald's face transformed as he watched his carefully constructed authority crumble before him. His expression cycled through disbelief, anger, and finally, desperation. You ungrateful people, he sputtered. This neighborhood would collapse into chaos without proper enforcement. I have dedicated years to maintaining standards here. The board president banged his gavel. Mr. Simmons, the board is issuing an immediate cease and desist order. You are to discontinue all activities purporting to represent this HOA in any capacity. Furthermore, we will cooperate fully with any legal investigations regarding your actions. As the police officers approached Gerald with documentation for the restraining orders we had filed, he stood frozen, clipboard hanging limply at his side. For perhaps the first time in years, Gerald Simmons found himself facing actual, legitimate authority and discovering how powerless he truly